so far so good, and I hope this helps Marilyn a little bit with her research. Okay,
Yeah.
and when your novel, Marilyn, becomes a screenplay, remember who your technical consultant is.
You know, I have a nephew who is actually a movie producer and actor, and I keep telling him he needs to make a book. He needs to make a movie, and my sister keeps saying, "You need to make a movie," but he doesn't listen to me. I'm just his aunt.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, it would make a cool movie, I'm sure. But
It would.
anyway, I just wanted to start out with a couple of disclaimers, okay? That I've got a lot of Confederates in my program, but I'm not a historical revisionist. And also, I don't have a PhD in American history. So please bear with me. I'm not a, Civil War buff in that sense. I don't know all the battles backwards and forwards and, analyze them. We're not going to get into that anyway, because my specific interest here is the Jews in the Civil War. And this isn't a work of great scholarship or depth. I just picked out some biographical sketches, you could call them, some people who have very interesting stories. I think that they're just interesting stories to tell. It's hard to say that there was an overall, Jewish approach to the issues of the Civil War. They were here. Sorry, this is nonsense. It's coming up. Okay.
Oh, there we go.
The Jews were pretty much like their neighbors as far as the politics of this. So here, we'll just show a few statistics. We're not really going to get into that too much. 1850 and 50,000. There were only 50,000 Jews in the U.S. 1861, there were quite a few more already. And that was because of a lot of immigration from Central Europe. A lot of us are from like Eastern Europe. That didn't start until later. That was like late 1800s from Russia and from Eastern Europe, from Poland. This was mostly from Germany. And a lot of it was due to failed revolutionary activity. Sometimes Jewish people were involved in some of these unsuccessful political movements and got out, and went to the US, immigrated. So these are estimations, because we don't necessarily have exact numbers. Not everybody was talking about whether they were Jewish or not, so it was always a little bit difficult to collect these statistics. But in the Confederate Army, there were maybe up to 2,000 Jews. In the Union Army, many more, because there were just more Jews up north, in the industrialized North, primarily.
Steve?
And what I said, yes, Marty.
Steve, just wanted to let you know, on my mother's side, my maternal grandmother, her family came here from Alsace-Lorraine in 1820. And the reason I wanted to comment about it is that there were smaller pogroms going on in different countries. In Alsace-Lorraine, there was a major push to get the Jews out, seize their property, things like that. And that was the time when Alsace-Lorraine was part of Germany, as opposed to France. And then fast forward a good number of years, and I meet a fellow whose grandfather also, that family came from Alsace-Lorraine and were Jewish. So it was all because of the way the Jewish the Jews were being treated in the country. So anyway, just wanted to mention
Yeah,
that.
okay. We'll have to talk about that more in depth sometime because, yeah, I'm very much into genealogy. That's an interesting source of your family there. But again, this huge influx due to failed revolutionary activity, depression in Europe, and expansion in the U.S. Now here's an important statistic I think to remember. Jews accounted for 1.25% of all Southern slave owners. There are a lot of stories that are circulated, by people who may have anti-Semitic agendas about Jewish involvement in the slave trade and Jewish slave ownership. There were Jews who were involved in slave trade, but they were not overrepresented.
Can you hear?
And also they, and I'm going to mention now a resource that you can get more information from. This is probably the best overall book there is on this subject. American Jewry and the Civil War. I think our library has it, but library is closed right now, right? But anyway, it was written by a very high-ranking chaplain in the Navy who was a rear admiral, rabbi chaplain. His name is Bertram Korn, whose area of interest was American history. And he wrote this terrific book about American Jewry in the Civil War. It's just a great book. So, anybody who wants a real scholarly dealing with this subject, this is where you should go. But anyway, he did review it. Lots of people have reviewed this subject. That's
Excuse me.
Yes.
Tell me again the name of the author.
Oh yeah, Korn, Korn.
Okay, thank
First
you.
name Bertram. Yeah.
Okay, great.
And he was back when he first published in 1951, he was the highest ranking chaplain in the Navy. He was a rear admiral.
Okay.
Yeah. And, a scholar on this subject. So anyway, so if you hear about that, that's, those stories are spread around by unsavory people, not our friends, and it's not, there's no, when it's carefully analyzed, when the statistics are looked at, that's just not true.
Steve,
Yes.
how many Jews were there living in the South?
Oh, how many overall were
Yeah.
in the South? I don't have that number, sorry. I don't have that number, but less than in the North. And I'll be getting into who they were in a minute, but this was a different environment than the North. And these were old Sephardi families primarily. And you'll see all the Confederates I'll be talking about are all Sephardi. And they didn't, when I did my Ladino program, we had the guests whose family went through the island of Rhodes. These were the Southern Sephardi families came through London, actually. They were from London, they were from Portugal. Many of these families had been active during the Revolutionary War against England, and it had come before. So these were old Southern families, and they were Sephardi. And you'll see, like from the names, but less of them, because it was the South was rural and sparsely populated, and so much less than in the North. That much I can tell you.
Steve,
Yes.
in my book, which is Revolution and After, they were Sephardi. They settled in the South. Charleston is where my family wound up, but they had by the 1800s, they already had established a synagogue. They had a Jewish community.
Yeah.
Already by
In
then.
South Carolina, especially. South Carolina.
Yeah, that's why I put them there.
And
especially-
again, I think I've got a little bit on that a little bit later. So,
Yeah.
so I don't want to get ahead of myself here.
No.
Steve, they were also in Savannah.
Oh,
Yes.
Savannah,
Savannah,
right?
Georgia had an early Jewish population.
okay. Now this is sort of a atypical view. This is the Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, where a lot of Confederate dead are buried, and this is a monument honoring Jewish Confederate dead. Now, you might be seeing less of this flag in the future. Of course, it's been hijacked by the rednecks and the white supremacists. So it's got a whole different meaning now. And what's written, if you can make it out, it might be hard to make it out, but it basically, the Shema is written here. It says, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And then it says, in blessed and eternal memory of the South sons and daughters of Abraham, upon the battlefields and home front in Dixie's land, they gave all to the cause of the Confederacy. Okay, so with all due respect, they were on the wrong team, but.
It happened.
Steve,
Yes, go ahead.
it's interesting that Jewish people would be into slavery when we celebrate, our freedom every year at Passover. I've always found that just absolutely fascinating. Why more Jews aren't on the forefront of any kind of issue that has to do with emancipation. It's just bewildering to me.
I will get into that in a few slides. Okay. As a matter of fact, I think it may even be the next slide about some rabbis and their positions on slavery and what they said, which will be quite interesting.
On, apropos to that, my family in my book were not slave owners, and that was why they said we could never do that because we were slaves. Blah 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 blah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Eddie, oh yeah, Marty, go ahead.
Steve, a friend of mine, she was looking up her family ancestry and found out that during the time period just before the Civil War, there were Jewish pirates. There were also the trade that came in through the Caribbean. There was a lot of trade for rice and for other products because and slaves.
Yeah.
Curacao, the island of Curacao, at the time of the Revolutionary War, had a very large Jewish population. They came through the Netherlands from Spain and established a huge Sephardic community down there. And they donated tons of money to the American Revolution. And and they have on exhibit at that temple, they have many letters from George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin and Sam Adams, thanking for all the monies that were donated in their service during the American Revolution. So that you can see how this was building up in the South because that would be the closest port area for them.
Mm-hmm.
There were also gun runners.
They were gun runners.
Yes, they were. They were.
Yeah. Now this is a sign at Richmond's old Hebrew cemetery, which was the only place where, as a matter of fact, due to anti-Semitism, and I'll get to that in another slide, Jewish Confederate dead couldn't be buried in Confederate cemeteries. So they established an area within their Hebrew cemetery where they buried their 30 Jewish Confederate soldiers buried here at this Hebrew cemetery of Richmond. And this tells the history a little bit. I am just going to go through this because I've got a lot of slides to show you folks. And hopefully this will be on the recording. this maybe I will go through to here. Let me see what we're going. This is kind of an interesting little document, okay? It's a form of service, okay? A handout, I guess, for an important service, but you can see that this is for the support of the Confederacy. And you can also see that it's a Sephardi, because they're referring to the Torah as Sepharim, which for me, I'll have to check with a rabbi this afternoon, but for me, that's sort of, that would seem like a Sephardi way to refer to them. They Ashkenazi would say Sifrei Torah. Just calling them Sfarim, I don't know, that might be a little Sephardi, and also calling it a Teva, where the Torah goes, which is literally box. That's not the usual Ashkenazi term. So I'm thinking that this is a Sephardi shul. And of course, this is by request of the president of the Confederacy, and they're praying for the success of their endeavor. Okay, now we're going to get into their rabbis in slavery, because as Gail pointed out, you know, we can scratch our heads a little bit about, you know, we celebrate being freed from slavery. So how could they in good conscience be getting served by slaves and be celebrating a Seder, you know? Wouldn't the irony of that strike most people? Anyway, this is a gentleman who lived up north and actually made a sermon, quite famously, a speech. He claimed afterwards it wasn't exactly in favor of slavery, it was more anti-abolitionist. But anyway, the Southern press really caught on, and they really liked this guy. And so they, you know, they spread what he had said around, because he said, you know, he talked about how the Bible had special instruction for, you know, treating the slave as a person, which he pointed out was a little bit, in the South, they were treating it as a slave was a possession, was a possession, just material possession, not really a person. No, in the Jewish Bible, you know, you're a person, even though if you really delve into the details of description of slavery and how to treat slaves in the Bible, there is a differentiation between Jewish and Canaanite slaves. And Jewish slaves are treated quite a bit better. Now, the Talmud sort of equated the two. In the Talmud, they sort of evened it out, and there wasn't that discrepancy so much. But anyway, this was Rafal, I'm going to guess his name was pronounced, rabbi of Bnei Yeshurun, who came out very strongly against the abolitionists, and his speech was interpreted as being pro-slavery. Now here's somebody from the other side. This is Rabbi David Einhorn, who was an abolitionist, and he spoke his mind, no ifs, ands, or buts. And actually, he barely got away without being tarred and feathered, because he spoke his mind in Baltimore, Maryland, which was an area that was somewhat supportive of the South. So some congregants, you know, who were really worried about him and liked him, snuck him out, so he wouldn't get hurt. And he had to go to New York, and that's where he continued to be. But he said he said that it was what Rabbi Rafal had said was a deplorable farce. The institution of slavery in the South was completely inconsistent with any Jewish values, and that the Jewish experience as slaves in Egypt should serve as a reason not to support this. And of course, a riot broke out and he was almost tarred and feathered. So he spoke his mind in the wrong place. You know, Maryland was a border state. And luckily it was, there was a lot of secession talk in Maryland, but it was close enough so Lincoln could repeatedly send in the army to arrest people and, you know, bash up printing presses and stuff like that, for which the South call him a tyrant. Now here's somebody who's a little bit different politically. This is a very prominent Reform rabbi, Isaac Mayer Wise, who was a Democrat. So politically, he wasn't actually a supporter of Lincoln and not really a supporter of the war, and someone who wanted to see reconciliation with the South, even though he was a Northerner. And interestingly, and I'll get to that a little bit later, Confederate prisoners of war actually chose this gentleman to appeal on their behalf because they thought he would be sympathetic. And I'll get to the Confederate prisoners a little bit later. And he was also criticized for his opinion on slavery, which was a little bit wishy-washy. Now, this is an interesting quote. After Lincoln's assassination, Rabbi Wise says that in a conversation with Lincoln, Lincoln told him that he believed that he was of Jewish descent. And this is the only record of such a statement. So was Lincoln serious or was he kidding, you know? Hard to say. There are no other references supporting this, and Lincoln was a little bit of a jokester. So maybe he didn't expect to be taken seriously. Okay, now this is my first and a very prominent Confederate. This is Judah P. Benjamin, who was actually, for a period of time, he was Secretary of War and later became Secretary of State. I think he didn't get along too well with the generals, so he was more effective as Secretary of State than Secretary of War. He was appointed by Jeff Davis, and throughout the conflict was really Jefferson Davis's right-hand man. He came from an old Sephardi family, and the fact that he was Jewish was well recognized, and back in those days was commented upon without restraint. He was told by, here it says here that Ben Wade of Ohio said that Benjamin was an Israelite in Egyptian clothing. And then with his characteristic eloquence and wit, Benjamin replied, "It is true that I am a Jew, and when my ancestors were receiving their 10 commandments from God amidst the thundering and lightning of Mount Sinai, the ancestors of my opponent were herding swine in the forests of Great Britain." So there's a come down for you. And here's a quote about Judah Benjamin.
Yeah. Brings back all the memories when you were doing your book, reading about all these people.
Now, if you're interested in this character, and he's a very interesting character, I think this book is in our library too. It's written by a Southern Jewish lawyer named Eli Evans.
Steve?
Yes.
Steve,
Yeah.
I'd like to tell a little anecdote, if I may, about many years ago, we took a tour of the South, and among them were these fabulous old plantations. And I think you'll find this very interesting. One of the plantations, and it's in the history books, was owned by a man named Julius Rosenwald. He was the founder of Sears Roebuck. And in the early days of our country, he's in the books. He was the largest single donor to Negro causes of any man or company in the United States. And it's documented. He gave more to every single Negro cause than any man ever did in the United States. And I think that's something that should be publicized today.
But they don't. They conveniently forget that stuff.
Uh-huh. And this was a Southerner, you said.
Was he a Southerner?
Yes.
And who like owned a plantation, but I guess, did he have slaves too?
Big plantation, absolutely, yeah.
And then he just sort of,
Then he founded Sears Roebuck.
yeah. And also was quite clearly sorry about the slavery.
Could be.
Yeah.
So I have a question. Did he have slaves during the war and then gave them up after the Emancipation Act, or how did that work? Or do you know?
She wants to know, was he a slave owner? I think he was later than that.
He was later than that,
Oh, okay. All right.
right?
Oh, okay.
But he had a big plantation in the South, and then he went into business and was the founder of Sears Roebuck in its early days of America.
And here he is on a $2 bill. This is Judah Benjamin. $2 Confederate, of course.
Oh,
And
Now,
he was an interesting character. As it says here, solitary man. He was estranged from his wife, and he really hung out a lot more with his wife's brother. And there, scholars think that he may have been a closeted gay. He ended up being buried in France. He was one of these, not only was he an unreconstructed rebel, but he probably would have been implicated in Lincoln's assassination, because he may have been involved in running Confederate agents in the North, and may have been paying John Wilkes Booth too. So he escaped to Europe and never returned. Now, he had a small grave that didn't really even have his name proper. It was just Judah Phillips. And the Daughters of the Confederacy found his grave and decided that it wasn't appropriate. So they fixed it up and put a lot of Confederate gewgaws on it. And the Daughters of the Confederacy, I guess, are a group of genteel Southern ladies who, to some degree, are rewriting history a little bit. So they were the ones who took care of his grave and made it a little bit more impressive.
Steve,
Yes.
I wanted to ask you a question. Maybe you have a more accurate figure. I can never get a straight figure. From what I've been reading, at the start of the Civil War, there were between 600,000 and 1 million slaves in the United States. Do you have any figure that ascertains to that?
No, sorry, I don't. That we will have to Google afterwards. Yeah, like I said, I'm not really an in-depth scholar of the Civil War. I've got an interest in Jews, and I also had an interest in medical history of the Civil War. So I used to belong to an organization that had regular conferences on that subject. So I know something about that. And enough to tell you that that Hollywood got it all wrong. You
Oh,
don't believe most of the stuff that you see in Gone with the Wind,
Right.
or other movies. Not too accurate. One of the inaccuracies, just if I can digress a little bit on the medicine, is that they like to make it a little more dramatic. So of course, the South, lacking equipment, is operating on people without anesthetics. That's probably not true. Okay, they always used anesthetics. They had enough. There was ether used, and another agent that I'm just blanking on the moment. But actually, the Confederates were more efficient about using the anesthetics. The Union Army, the standard way was just dump it on a rag and hold it over the guy's nose and mouth, and maybe you would give him a little too much, and a lot would go to waste. And Stonewall Jackson's surgeon, whose name was Hunter Holmes McGuire, patented an anesthesia mask that utilized the anesthetic very efficiently. So you didn't just pour it in a rag. You put a few drops into this mask. It would mix with the air. You wouldn't overdose the patient. So there you go. Little fun fact on Confederate anesthesia.
Steve,
Yes.
when it comes to medicine, I want to ask you a question. I read a long time ago that one of the reasons there were so many amputations during the Civil War is that the only antiseptic they had was called colloidal silver. They had nothing else to use. That's why as soon as there was an infection or something, they cut the man's limb off. Have you heard about using colloidal silver?
I think that's more of a astringent kind of, but there were various things used, but nothing was very good. And
Right.
yeah, the problem was the mini balls. The mini balls would cause like shattering. Like the old muskets weren't that bad. The fracture could heal, but the mini balls would cause shattering of bone, and then there wasn't anything they could do. Then they would have to amputate because there wasn't any fixing it. And yes, it could cause dangerous infections if they didn't do the amputation. So there were a lot of amputations, and a lot of people. I'll get into a little bit more about one Confederate surgeon, a little bit more in detail. But yeah, a lot of these physicians and surgeons also were not that well trained, so there wasn't that much they knew how to do also.
Now, have you heard that there were 800,000 casualties in the Civil War? 800,000 people lost their lives,
That sounds about right to me, but
Yes.
I don't
which is
remember.
an astounding figure.
Yeah.
Off the topic.
Yes, and that's the part of the fascination with this topic. This is a very popular topic from all aspects. I think it's just how horrible it was, this terrible tragedy that was self-inflicted.
Steve,
Yes.
Marilyn had her hand, Gail has had her hand up for a
Oh,
long
I'm
time, and
sorry.
then I wanted to add
You know
something.
what? I hid people so I could see the slides better. I'm sorry. Didn't see you,
Okay.
Gail. Why don't you go ahead, Gail?
Okay, I'm not a scholar on the Civil War, but I've been kind of a Civil War buff for probably 20 years. I have acres of books.
Oh, so help me out here.
No, I'm not a scholar. But one of the reasons for the high rate of death was not from wounds, but from infection.
That's
Right.
true too.
And the
That's
highest,
very true. Yeah.
the majority of the deaths were from infection. As a matter of fact, my great-great-great-grandfather died of sepsis in Kentucky during the Civil War.
Mhm.
Yes. And you could die from childhood diseases, because some of them were just very remote. They could have measles outbreaks. People would die, but also smallpox. You know? Yeah,
Steve?
go ahead, Marty. Yeah.
Okay, first of all, I have a surgeon's manual from the Civil War. And in it, almost 95% of it is devoted to amputation. Remember, they had nothing like antibiotics. The silver amalgam that I think it was it? Well, anyway, that was alluded to. It is like styptic. When you're shaving and you have some bleeding, it'll help clot the blood, but it does. But it's not for major. It will not work for major wounds. And so they didn't have anything like what we have today. They didn't even have ether at that time.
Well, they did actually. They did have ether and chloroform. So that was, and there was one was the preferred agent of the North, and one was the preferred agent of the South, but I don't remember which was which. Definitely ether and chloroform.
Okay, my understanding was that it was a little later, but maybe I'm wrong. But they really do not mention anesthetic agents in the book that I have. They mention the only thing they have is alcohol, to help sterilize things like that. But they didn't have anything at their disposal.
No, that I would have to disagree with you, because that was pretty emphasized at these, and these people were pretty impressive. They had really done their homework. So I think
I'm sure they did in some cases. All I'm saying is that the book that I have says absolutely nothing about anesthesia.
He mentioned the silver that I mentioned.
Yeah.
Email Ruth Ann.
Yeah, Gail has her hand up now again.
I have an accurate figure on the casualties. It was 750,000 lives. More than the combined total losses in all of the wars between the Revolutionary War and Vietnam War. They calculated that as a portion of the total population, the Civil War killed 7 times as many soldiers as World War II.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was
American soldiers or soldiers of everybody?
Both sides. Yeah.
American.
Well, both count as American. The Confederates were American.
No. A portion of the Civil War killed 7 times as many American soldiers as World War II.
Fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Now this next slide I have, this is another very interesting character. David Camden de Leon, also from a good Sephardi family. He was appointed by, first I should say he had sort of a brilliant military career. He was known as the fighting doctor because he took over command when the commanders fell during the Mexican War. He was there as a surgeon, but he took over command and led soldiers in battle and got commendations from Congress for doing this. Then when the question of secession came up, he struggled with it. He struggled with the question of whether he should resign. It wasn't an easy decision for him. He even wrote to his brother that there are 2 doors very close to each other. One is the door of treason and one is the door of patriotism, and you have to be very careful which one you're opening. Ultimately, he decided to side with the South and resigned his U.S. Army commission and was promptly appointed by Jefferson Davis to be the Surgeon General of the Confederate Army. Okay, this is one of our tribe. Okay. Now, again, that's the more you delve into this, the more you find out that these people are just people, and they have their private demons and their personal problems, And he only lasted in that job about 2 months before he was replaced. And what I found out about him is he had mood swings, and he was self-medicating with alcohol quite heavily. And actually, there was a Southern belle named Mary Chestnut who kept a diary, knew everybody in the South, all the VIPs. And actually, she got quoted a lot in the Ken Burns documentary, her quotes. And yeah, no, just let me just finish the sentence, Gail, because I did want to say something about him. And she said about him that he tended to drink too much, and then he would repeat himself and bore people. Maybe he was telling stories of the Mexican War, and maybe he was telling the same story over and over again. But anyway, that's what Mary Chestnut said about David Camden de Leon. So anyway, when he was removed as Surgeon General of the Army, he was made Surgeon General of the Army of Northern Virginia, which was Lee's army. He didn't last in that job either. And then he resigned his commission. It's not clear how he spent the rest of the war, but at the end of the war, he was one of those unreconstructed rebels who just said the hell with this and left the country, went to Mexico, but ultimately came back and had a medical practice in New Mexico. And now I'm sorry, Gail, why don't you tell us what you wanted to share?
Oh, I was just going to say that book by, it's really a journal or a diary of Mary Chestnut, is probably, if you ever get into the Civil War, it's a must to have it on your bookshelf. It's really important because it's from a civilian's point of view, if you would, rather than a general or a soldier or something like that. And there's also a couple of people that could be mentioned, the same thing, civilians from the North that kept journals, very accurate and interesting viewpoints.
Now, you raise your hand.
Steve?
Oh, yeah, somebody's raising their hand, but I can't see who it is.
Bill, it's Bill.
Oh,
It's
okay,
Bill.
go ahead, Bill. Yeah, please. go
Okay.
ahead.
Just to add a little humor, just recently, they had the annual hot dog eating contest in Coney Island at Nathan's, and Danny Chestnut won. He ate 78 hot dogs. I wonder if he's any relation.
Interesting.
I have a technical question, Marilyn.
Yes, Marilyn, go ahead.
Are we supposed to be seeing these slides?
Monthly membership.
The slides I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, you should be seeing it. It's screen sharing.
We haven't seen any, you know.
No,
You haven't seen any slides?
no.
Does anybody else not see the slides? Does anybody else not see the slides? Oh, I'm not getting any responses, but it says I'm screen sharing, so I'm not sure why you wouldn't see. Do you know what? Do you know what? You might have it covered. Are you seeing a big window that just says Zoom on it?
No, I see you. In the big window, I see you. The same thing I see in the little window.
Do you know what? Then just could make me little then. I think you have to go above my picture and you can make different views of seeing the participants. You see the icons above my picture there. So just go to those icons and you can even make all the pictures disappear. All the pictures of participants. There's one that's sort of a flat line.
I sort of tune out after a while. I try to do up at times. And that,
Put the screen share. Ah! Switch the screen share. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Look at everything we missed.
Steve, tell Ricky to mute her site, please.
Oh, I think Ruth Ann can mute everybody.
I'm doing it now.
Thank you.
Okay. And just a little bit, somebody mentioned before about Jews of South Carolina. So I found a little bit about Charleston, South Carolina, and the Sephardi Jews there go back to the 1600s even. And the first synagogue established in Charleston, Hal Kodesh Bit Elohim, and that was 1749. And the founders came from Georgia. They migrated when they were, Georgia was getting invaded by Spanish forces, and they were afraid they were going to be subjected to the Inquisition. And there was a Hazan, so this was a Sephardi synagogue. Isaac da Costa, you can tell by the name, is sort of a Sephardi name. And they mention here also that, of course, in general, people joined their neighbors. And so the Jewish community of Charleston was by and large supportive of the Confederacy. Now, this is an interesting character because this is our connection with the Confederate monuments. This is a gentleman named Moses Jacob Beale, who was a Confederate veteran. He served in the Confederacy, afterwards was an artist and sculptor, and lived in Europe, but did several sculptures that were basically Confederate monuments. Also, they say something here that as a young man, he may have had liaison with a free African American who worked in his parents' home. So he was a cadet. He served in the Confederacy. I think in the next slide, I have a little bit about the monuments. He did want to erect a monument after the war celebrating Robert E. Lee. The idea was rejected. I think actually most of the monuments that were erected were much later. I think immediately after the war, there was a feeling that this wasn't a good idea. He also, he erected a statue called Southern, which was unveiled in 1910 at the Cemetery for Confederate Prisoners of War at Johnson's Island, Ohio. He returned to the States to visit relatives, and his most famous monument is a bronze memorial to the Confederate soldiers buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Arlington National Cemetery, of course, is primarily a Union cemetery. As a matter of fact, it was intentionally a little bit of a slap in the face to Robert E. Lee because it was erected on his property.
Yes.
They did that on purpose. That wasn't an accident.
Right.
And but there are Confederate soldiers buried at Arlington, and Moses Jacob Ezekiel did a monument to these soldiers, and I have a little bit about that monument in a moment. This is a picture of him from during the war. This is the monument. And very interestingly, in response to in particular, the death of Heather Heyer, the descendants of this gentleman have asked that his monument be removed.
Oh my God.
And these are his descendants who are saying this, okay? They, as a group, they wrote a letter. Members of the Ezekiel family from age 20 to age 90. And they said, we were all horrified at the Nazi and white supremacist demonstration in Charlottesville. All of us agree that monuments to the Confederacy are racist justifications of slavery, of owning people. We wanted to say that although Ezekiel is a relative of ours, we still believe it's a relic of a racist past.
Yep.
And actually, you know, if you look at the details of this monument, it's got some pretty offensive details. It has a loyal slave on the monument. Of course, you know, the Southerners, one of the claims is that they treated slaves like a family, very well, and slaves were very loyal. So there's this one detail on the monument of the loyal slave holding up a child to a Confederate officer to be kissed. And there's also a detail of a Negro soldier marching to war together with his slavers. Actually, I didn't mention this about Judah Benjamin, but Judah Benjamin had suggested that the South allow Negroes, blacks, to serve in the Confederate Army and be freed. In other words, if you agreed to serve in the Confederate Army, you were free. And that suggestion was not accepted. That was just his idea. But it didn't go anywhere. Any comments? Anybody want to comment? I'm not seeing hands, so. Oh, Marilyn has a comment.
Listen, does this lecture include prominent Jewish Northerners? Or are we just
Yes.
talking about Southerners too?
Sorry. I got sort of, they were the more interesting stories. I really got into them. I do have some of them. Yes. Yes. And so very briefly, I've got another Confederate.
Although,
but this is, yes, go ahead.
we could do part 2 next week and
I
do the
suppose-
Northerners next week.
I suppose we could, but we still have a little time. We're still okay with time, I think. I'm just going through a couple of the really prominent ones. This is actually Abraham Myers, who was the highest ranking, I guess, quartermaster general. You could call him. He was he had pursued a military career. He was involved in the Mexican War, and actually, is everybody familiar with a place called Fort Myers, Florida?
Oh, yeah.
It's named after this guy. Okay, one more Confederate with something named after.
Ziggy lives.
But that was actually even before he was involved in the Confederacy. It was his father-in-law was a high-ranking officer, and somehow got this fort in Florida named after his son-in-law, who hadn't at that time even done that much. But anyway, he became a quartermaster general of the Confederate Army, and which was a pretty thankless job because there was a blockade and there wasn't a whole lot of supply. And so when supplies were lacking, you could blame this guy. Ultimately, he was fired from the job, and it's rumored because his wife made some comments about Jefferson Davis's wife, specifically saying she was an old squaw.
Oh.
Which you don't say about the president's wife. Okay. And this is another Confederate, I'm afraid. This is a Simon Baruch. Simon Baruch is actually, have people heard of Bernard Baruch? Bernard Baruch, who was the advisors to presidents, I think from Roosevelt till Eisenhower. And this is his father, who was a German Jew, who was not necessarily a real fire eater, but when he came from Germany, he stayed with a Jewish family with very nice in South Carolina, and they helped him out when he wanted to go to medical school, and he was kind of paying him back. So he became a surgeon for the South. He was actually taken prisoner twice. The first time was early in the war, and it was sort of a gentleman's war then. So he was ordered to stay with the wounded, which doctors often were told to do. And the custom was to let the doctors go. The doctors were non-combatants. They didn't even all have official rank. He was from the standpoint of pay, he was equivalent to a captain in the cavalry. But you know, officially, you weren't really a combatant, and you weren't exactly an officer. And this was a time when doctors weren't particularly respected either. But anyway, they paroled him. The second time he was captured was actually at Gettysburg, and then he did actually. Then all bets were off. It wasn't a gentleman's war anymore, and he did have to stay in a POW camp. But he had also been ordered at that time to stay with his wounded. The Confederates had set up a hospital in a place called the Black Horse Tavern. And when the Union Army took the field, they captured him and all his wounded patients. At the time that he was captured, though, he had the chutzpah to yell at his Union captors that they were firing at his hospital, which they said they weren't. But hospitals were marked with a yellow flag. You weren't supposed to be firing at a hospital. And he thought that the cannon fire was directed at his hospital, and that wasn't right. And he told them so. And actually his claim to fame came later because he became very involved in public health. He was a great believer in the power of just using water, and supported public baths. So and if you're interested in this guy, I have this book actually. Somebody wrote his biography. I actually met this lady at a conference once who wrote this biography. Another interesting little fun fact, but not so fun. Apparently, when the Ku Klux Klan started out, they didn't have anything against Jews. So this gentleman was also a member of the Ku Klux Klan. I'm not saying he was an enthusiastic member, but Bernard Baruch retells in his own biography, this is the son of Simon Baruch, says that once he was just exploring in the attic and found this, white sheet, and the white sheet they wear, and the white whatever they put on their head, whatever the hood. So apparently, Ku Klux Klan started out, they didn't have anything against Jews or Catholics, then they decided to focus on them too. But anyway, just to his credit, he treated his patients very well, and his practice in South Carolina after the war was mostly poor whites and blacks, before going to New York and getting involved in public health. So it was a little bit odd.
Steve?
The people are complicated. Yes.
Steve, you mentioned, now I remember, Bernard Baruch was a high official in Franklin D. Roosevelt's cabinet, and he was a very prominent banker.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was like, a very, finance guy. There is a Bernard Baruch Foundation that supports, arts. And actually, there is a school named after Simon Baruch somewhere in New York. There's a middle school. And I think it's named after him, not because he's a Confederate, because he was a doctor and did all this public health stuff. So hopefully they won't remove that name.
You're not confusing it. You're not confusing it with the Bernard Baruch's college, are you? The school and the college in SUNY.
There are also Bernard Baruch has much more named after him.
Oh yeah.
His father Simon Baruch also.
Oh,
has one thing. Now I am going to wind up. I think that's a good idea that I reserve some slides. I'm just going to show you a little clip here from the TV movie Gettysburg.
Hmm.
And this is, do you know what? Or we could stop here. I guess we can stop. Do you know what? I'm going to do that because it goes better with the second half. I'm going to stop here.
You gotta leave us with the cliffhanger.
Okay, so this is the cliffhanger. Yeah, so we got this little clip, and it's got some relevance because actually the relevance is prisoners of war, and I'm going to be talking about some Jewish prisoners of war in a minute. So we'll leave this for next time. That'll work.
Right, good.
That sounds great.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
So
Steve.
we will continue next week.